seeing as our PM, Sir Keir Starmer, seems hell-bent on having a proxy war, if not an actual hot war, with Russia, I thought we could talk a bit about what that might actually look like if it happened, a conventional war with Russia. Because he does seem very aggressive. Cole did a bit on this the other day, I saw. We are in a full-blown proxy war, at least, with Russia, which is mad. Boris and then Rishi and now Starmer have walked us into a proxy war with Russia, where, we're now designing, building and selling cruise missiles to Ukraine and then egging them on to use them inside Russian territory. That is sort of a crazy state of affairs. Right.
Of course, yeah.
The border of Ukraine has got nothing to do with us.
We sort of butted in a way that seemed very much uninvited. And I know that we do enjoy getting involved in global conflicts that are none of our business, particularly if we're following in the Americans. We like to, puff our chests out on the world stage, perhaps more than we should.
Well, it's not just us, the French as well. Germans have sold them some arms and all sorts of different people, but of course mostly the United States. But yeah, we got the green light. Our establishment got the green light from the US establishment, State Department, Pentagon, whatever. Be in lockstep with our policy, and we just are.
Do you think it's a question of permission or a question of orders? Because we talk about autonomous and sovereign states, but people forget the notion of suzerainty, which has to do with maybe autonomy in the domestic, but also someone else dictating your foreign policy. So do you think it's an issue of permission or orders that you are going to support the effort?
I don't know, because I've got no actual insight, but I would imagine it's not orders as such. Okay. So, for example, if you remember during the Obama years, when the Pentagon and the State Department were gunning for Assad, and they said there was like a red line in the sand, or a red line, if he used chemical weapons, they would just start a massive air campaign against Syria, and then who knows what after that. And then Assad, they said he used them, and Obama immediately goes to the Pentagon, it's like, let's have a war with Syria then, to remove the Assad regime. And I think it was David Cameron was Prime Minister at the time, and we had a vote in Parliament, because David Cameron can't just unilaterally just send the whole RAF or whatever. He needed Parliament to green light it. And we voted against it. It was one of the few things that people like Diane Abbott and Ed Miliband have done, which is good. They sort of was like, no, we don't want any part of this. So that's one example of when the State Department and the Pentagon and the war bastards in America, all the hawks, whoever they are, wanted a war, and Britain said no. Now that is sort of the exception to the rule. But there you can say, even if they were given orders, we didn't play ball with those orders.
Okay.
I think it's less sort of orders. I doubt a general at the Pentagon rings up number 10 and says, you are doing this now. I doubt it works like that. But I don't know, it might do. But I doubt it. I really doubt it. It's just that someone like Boris and Rishi, who's a nothing man, an empty bag, an empty pair of trousers, but someone like Boris and Starmer, I think genuinely that's what they actually think. It is a good and righteous, the right thing to do to confront Putin. I believe they believe that. So anyway, what would it look like if Russia was to launch a conventional attack on Britain? Now, all of this assumes that nukes aren't at play.
Well, if it's a nuclear exchange, we won't be speculating too long how they're going to invade, because it's going to be over pretty quickly, isn't it?
I'm supposed to say about now that we've got a merch store, and the Trump merch we're going to stop selling that very soon. So if you want Trump 24 merch that we've got, now's the time.
Look at that poster. That would look great on your wall, wouldn't it?
And we'll move on to...
look at that mug. That would look great with probably not tea in it. Coffee, Don't have so much tea in America anymore, do you?
$14.99.
Bargain.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that's dirt. Well,
Bo.
worth it, sorry.
The hawks from the Pentagon are telling you to shill the merch.
I just did an anti-shill. What I did? I'll get in trouble. Let's move on swiftly from that. Okay, assuming no nukes are at play. If they are at play, Yeah, I don't think they are. I think any fear mongering that Russia wouldn't use nukes, because of course it would become an actual international pariah at that point, and we would retaliate. That's the nature of it. We have got a nuclear. We're one of just 7 or 8 countries that have got a nuclear program, and we've got 2 nuclear submarines, one of which is at sea, hidden at any given moment, with Trident nukes on it. So we could rain down dozens of nukes on Russia if we had to. So, apart from anything else, highly doubt Russia would use nukes anyway, and if they did, they wouldn't use it against countries like France, Britain, America, because we can nuke them back.
Okay, so Swindon is out of reach.
So
well, you don't want to nuke Swindon because it'll be an improvement.
Well, unless they nuke like Cardiff, or was there another one? Yeah, look, if they nuke Cardiff, Swindon is. Look, we don't get incinerated immediately, but it wouldn't be any kind of fun.
All our windows will get blown out.
Yeah. If they dropped it on Bristol, we'd be in trouble.
Well, there are already a bunch of mutants in Bristol to begin with. There's no radiation yet.
Because some of the Russian nukes are some of the biggest nukes still. They're not Tsar bomber size. That was sort of a one-off, almost like an experiment. But still, they've got both the biggest nuclear arsenal, just in terms of numbers, and also the biggest warheads. So,
I do wonder how many of them are actually ready to go, though, or how many of them are sort of, for want of a better word, siloed. That's probably the worst word I could have used.
Well, so there's one of those things about the Russian military. On one hand, you can be forgiven for thinking, oh, it's all antiquated. Like they've got that one aircraft carrier that's sort of got a steam stack, and it seems really old-fashioned. And that their military on some levels, although might have very large numbers of men, isn't actually particularly professional or brilliant. So there's one angle where the Russian military is lame, but there's another view where and it's probably the one I would go along with, and I think most military analysts go along with, is that no, it's actually really quite good. They have been spending and upgrading, and a lot of their stuff is cutting edge. I'll get into that in a moment.
Well, they have been in a conflict for quite some time, which, you can't replace genuine combat experience. Although it is also, to be devil's advocate to my own point here, it is worth mentioning that Texas has a higher GDP than all of Russia.
Yeah.
So if it comes down to economies, as it did in, say, the previous 2 world wars, then the United States still has the edge. But of course, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, but also wars are not fought on paper. So sometimes some powers could be on paper number 1 or number 2, but it ends up that they're not.
So a couple of things to say about like that Texas comparison, for example. Yeah, you're absolutely right. One, I'm just talking about Britain versus Russia here, because if they were to have a war with the United States, that's a whole different thing. And yeah, you're right. Although Russia isn't fantastically rich, its economy, it isn't some sort of behemoth like China or the United States. Still, they've got enough to be spending on designing brand new long-range bombers and things, all sorts of brand new missile and weapon systems, countermeasures and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, Texas might have a bigger economy than the whole of Russia, but they've got enough money, enough research and development, which certainly outstrips us. Well, let's get into that. So, assuming we're not going to have a nuclear exchange with Russia, what would an actual conventional attack from them look like? Because we are essentially bombing them, right?
We've got other people launching the missiles for us, but there are missiles supplied to them with our advisors and our training. We're doing everything but push the button ourselves, basically.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're giving Ukraine $3 billion a year, and apparently, anyway, the line is we'll keep doing that for as long as it takes. Yeah, those Storm Shadow cruise missiles. How is that not really Britain doing it really? Like you say, it's everything except the guy that actually presses the button. Right, so you can, if you just put yourself in the place of Putin or Kremlin planners for one moment, you would be like, well, Britain is waging a type of war against us. Right, so...
Well, people were more than happy to talk about it when it was the Cold War, saying, oh, the Soviets are backing this faction and we need to fight them because the Soviets are backing them. And that was fine.
Yeah. I mean, so to put that in perspective, 3 billion, you could you could pay for 78,000 nurses with that money.
As in their annual salary.
Yeah, yeah. Or we give over 8 billion a year in foreign aid to countries, even countries like India and China that have got a space program and we haven't. And that could buy 2 more aircraft carriers. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, aircraft carriers are a bit old hat, a bit 20th century.
Get with the time.
Yeah. Nonetheless, when you talk about, because you hear just on the news or on Twitter, you hear the billions being thrown about for this or that. And it becomes, you get desensitized to it. But just a few billion is a gigantic, fantastic amount of money.
Yeah, I wouldn't say no. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, despite all of this, despite all of the aggression the British government is showing to the Russian bear, we also are cutting our defence budgets. We cut it by 500 million recently, but over the last 2 generations or so, well, ever since the war, World War II, we've cut back on defence and spending just kind of constantly. Little blips here and there, but essentially cutting back to the point now where we've got a very small army, and although highly professional, and our navy, although highly advanced, one of the most advanced navies in the world, it's small. It is small. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, which is better than most countries.
Yeah, but it's very few countries actually have aircraft carriers.
Right, yeah, very few. Yeah, yeah, very few. And other than the biggest players, they're usually like an ex-Russian one from the 70s or something. I think Brazil's got one, and it's like an ex-Soviet thing, or an ex-US one that they were just going to mothball or just get rid of, so they sold it to like someone like Spain or Brazil.
Palm it off to the Brazilians.
Yeah. So we've got something in the order of 6 destroyers and 9 frigates. That's pretty small. I mean, they're cutting-edge ships. They really are. They're among the best of the best. But that's not very many. And they're nearly always deployed somewhere else in the world, not particularly guarding our coastlines. So, defence analysts say, and there was a great video I must give a shout out to, a great video by Mark Felton. If anyone doesn't follow Mark Felton Productions on YouTube, I advise you do that, because I think he's a great source. He's a fantastic historian. A lot of what I'm talking about here is taken from his video. But I've seen other people talk about this stuff and know a bit about it myself and things. But so most say that if Russia were to strike Britain, mainland Britain, it would be in the form of cruise missiles. It wouldn't be like they would invade with landing crafts like Grimsby. Thousands of little green men coming ashore.
Well, they've allied with aliens as well, have they now?
Oh no, the little green men. You know, when they invaded Crimea, it was like this.
Oh,
they're soldiers.
I haven't heard that term for such a long time that I was thinking, like, UFOs? What? I know they've got, pretty good technology, but not that advanced.
When the Russians send in men, but they don't have any sort of formal Russian military insignia anywhere on them.
Yeah, that's right. Because that happened in 2014, didn't it? In the east of Ukraine. Yeah.
And Russia actually has been fighting wars, small-ish, limited wars, all over the place for the last 20 years. There's like the incursions into South Ossetia, if you remember that, and fighting in Georgia. They go all the way to Grozny, I can't remember. But Russia have actually got, on some level, a veteran army, which we haven't, of course. Well, I don't know. We get involved all over the place. And our special forces, we certainly have our special forces training Ukrainian troops on the ground and all stuff like that. So anyway, if Russia were to attack us, it would probably be in the form, assuming nukes are off the table, cruise missiles. So the reality is Britain's defences against such a thing are woefully lacking, which does mean that what Starmer is doing is sort of crazy. It's like real brinksmanship. Because if I had to put some money on it, I highly doubt Putin will launch cruise missiles against mainland Britain. But if that did come to pass, there'd be not a great deal we can do about it. So, for example,
well, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he's doing his best to make Britain so making the strike target so unvaluable to strike that it will just disincentivize it. It'd be like, why Somalia doesn't have a strong standing army. It's, who's going to invade? Who wants that? Or Haiti, they don't have a strong standing army. They're fine because no one wants to take over it. Similar thing here. That's basically what Starmer's got going for him, defence policy-wise.
Yeah,
I'm being a bit facetious, but there is some element of truth to that.
Yeah, no, I personally think that nothing's going to happen. And I think that actually expressing resolution here is a good thing in this. And obviously, I don't agree with this policy, with Starmer's policies, but I think now the war is about to end. So he's just barking, and everyone's barking. And I actually think also Putin is barking. And the people on Twitter who are constantly saying about, it's only Starmer who's going to cause World War III or our demise, that's actually slop, I think.
Yeah, I think that the people that try and over-egg that sort of thing are trying to sell a narrative out of self-interest for amping up people and actually the reality of this situation. Although, the small possibility of a nuclear exchange is obviously worthy of note. I think that actually people are being quite irresponsible with how much they're scaring people, basically.
And also, if we're in a situation like that, I'd rather whoever is in power, whatever political party, is actually barking and is more like a war hawk than like a just okay, let's sit here and have some tea and biscuits. I'd rather someone was more wild with statements, because at this moment they're not veridical.
Right.
It's more like people barking to each other. I'll bite your ear off. Bite your tongue off.
Mike Tyson.
Two dogs are going wild at each other through a fence, and someone takes the fence away, and both dogs just go quiet. I mean, as I say, I highly doubt Putin will do anything against mainland Britain. So this segment is just simply if he did. Yeah.
The point of it is to point out how our defence spending leaves us woefully inadequately prepared for an attack, right?
So this is how woefully unprepared we are. We have a thing called the QRA, the Quick Reaction Alert. So if Russian aircraft were to enter our airspace, what would we actually do about it? Well, we've got the Quick Reaction Alert. So this is the whole of Britain's airspace. 4 typhoons out of 2 different air bases. That's it. 4 typhoons. We've got 4 protecting the Falklands. So 4 for the whole of Britain. Right. So
I don't think Millet is going to necessarily launch a military invasion. I think that's kind of going to sabotage his economic recovery.
Oh, yeah. Out of RAF Coningsby and RAF Lossiemouth in Scotland. And then we've got sort of radar stations, but again, there's only 3 others: RAF Swanage, RAF High Wycombe, and RAF Bulmer. And there's also what they call 7 other sort of more remote radar bases from the Outer Hebrides down to Cornwall. In other words, if Putin did want to sort of poke our eyes out, so to speak, because we've got no AWACS aircraft either, none. We used to have some, but we got rid of them in 2021. So there'd be 3 radar Air Force RAF bases with radars and 7 other smaller installations, none of which are defended by surface-to-air missile batteries, none, completely undefended. So with just a dozen or less, dozen cruise missiles could effectively pluck out our eyes. And then there's the 4 typhoons to take care of. And then they've got complete air superiority over us. That's how modern wars are now, is you take out the enemy's ability to sort of see you, and then take out their fast jets. And if you do that, then you win. You basically win. So Russia's got the capability to do that easily. So they've got a long-range bomber. What's it? The Tu-190, is it? The Blackjacks, they call them. Or Tu-160s. It's Tu-160 Blackjacks. And they're like a long-range, like a big aircraft. I think that's a picture of one. Or that is a picture of one. They're massive. They look a bit like a Concorde. And they can hold 12 cruise missiles apiece. Russia's got 17 of those with 10 more on order. And they do buzz in and around our airspace by the North Sea fairly regularly.
I've heard about that.
Yeah,
a few times.
That's an old Cold War thing. Used to do that during the Cold War all the time, kind of constantly. They stopped doing it in sort of the 90s, really, early 2000s. But they do it again now these days. So they go like they're the fastest long-range bomber ever built. They go over Mach 2, right? So if he sent 10 of those laden with 12 cruise missiles apiece versus 4 Typhoons, the point is he could take out our early warning systems easily. And then it's just a matter of bouncing rubble, right? If he wanted to do it, you could take out civilian infrastructure things like, because we're an island and we rely on our imports just as we did in World War II. We rely massively on ship imports to us. At Harwich and Felixstowe, giant ports. If you blew just a small amount of the infrastructure up there, or a couple of power stations here or there, we know very, very well from recent history that it doesn't take much at all to profoundly disrupt our supply chain. Russia would need to do very little, really, in the scheme of things. Wouldn't need to be carpet bombing anything. Just blow up a few things. Like they blow up Felixstowe, for example. There would be supply chain issues massively. I remember in the earlier 2000s, at one point, The Sun wrote an article saying there might be fuel shortages, and people were immediately queuing up around the block to go to a petrol station to fill up their car and fill up jerry cans. Towards the beginning of COVID, people thought there might be a shortage of things like toilet paper.
I remember that well, yeah.
And people just hauled it immediately, go to shops and buy it all, and the shelves are empty, just on a hearsay scare type thing. So if there really were shortages or really were problems with the supply chain, the fabric of our civil society may well crumble very, very, very quickly. Once again, stress, I don't think Putin is going to do this. Just to say, if he did, he's completely capable of it, and there's not that much we could do about it. So, for example, Mark Felton talks about how we could put in missile defences, like the Rapier missile defence system, or we could deploy our small navy on the east coast in the North Sea, where some of their very advanced anti-cruise missile systems would help a bit. But if we fired enough of them, we'd be overwhelmed. So yeah, a bit of a worry, really.
I would like to address the American in the room here, and that's not you, by the way, Bo. I mean, in the sense of, I couldn't see a scenario where Russia is attacking Britain where the United States doesn't join in.
Or NATO.
We
are in NATO, aren't we? So yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they would be obliged to at that point, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I think most of our defence infrastructure has been set up with this alliance in mind. And we sort of fit in here and there, assisting the United States, particularly with our special forces and some of our more specialist equipment. And we would rely on them for a lot of that other stuff.
Yeah. There's US air bases in Britain.
I know, yeah.
To add to this, I mean, I don't know exactly about the NATO treaty and whether the Article 5 would work. Okay, that's up for debate. But one of the things why I think Putin also has no incentive to do so is because his interest now is to end the war as quickly as possible and resume trade as quickly as possible. And the UK is not a force to just ignore, both militarily and economically, but also especially economically. So I think basically this is an extra reason why there would be no incentive for him to do it.
It's a good point.
I know the segment is based on the assumption. Yeah, I know that.
No, sure. It's a good point. One thing I would say to counter it, although I say it's definitely a good point, is that we've already cut them off in all sorts of ways. We're already doing all sorts of embargoes and asset stripping of Russian assets. We've already been doing that for quite a few years. He's already outside of that club, if you like.
Well, I think a lot of things like Russian oil and gas, it's just being sold on to Europe via countries like India, for example. I know Germany was getting some basically laundered fossil fuels via these countries. And so they do find their way eventually. It's just that there has to be a workaround.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point about sort of NATO or just the Americans, that if Russia did do anything, any sort of hot war actions against mainland Britain, would NATO and the United States just immediately get involved in a large scale? Maybe, maybe not.
I'd like to see some Ukrainians help out. I mean, after all the help we've given them, time to return the favour.
But just if you're simply playing a strategy game, like a Total War game or Sid Meier's Civilization or something, you would want to strike at the factories that were building these Storm Shadow missiles, right? Just to stop them ending up in the Ukraine and being fired against you. But yeah. Now, last thing to say, I suppose, is that they've got no civil defence capabilities. That is sort of normal people, the normal populace, understanding what they could or should do in the event of any sort of attack. Ever since the war, during World War II that is, and the Cold War, there always used to be a thing. You might have some sort of shelter or any sort of instruction about how to behave and what to do. We don't have any of that anymore.
Well, I think some of the better educated ethnic Britons might remember the stories they were told about the war and what was done then and sort of defer to that. But I think what would actually happen, particularly with the new Britons, is lots of looting and chaos.
Yeah. Instead of all coming together as one and acting in the interests of the greater good and the national interest and that sort of thing, like during the Blitz, it would just be every man for himself. Mm-hmm. Every Bangladeshi for himself or whatever, it would just be, yeah.
The greater good.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the analysts say that anything like that would be accompanied by some sort of cyber attack as well, which the Russians seem to be.
So hold the NHS to ransom again, and it'll be useless. Oh no, our useless health service is useless again.
Because some have accused me of being a Putin apologist. Of course I'm not. Just because I'm not on board with the Zelensky government, it doesn't mean I'm pro-Putin. I was on a stream just the other day talking about just TV and films, and someone said, "Oh, why have you got this Kremlin mouthpiece on?" No. Putin is an autocrat. He's a tyrant on some level. Like, let's not forget Litvinenko.
He does kill people to stay in power. Yeah,
he's a murderer. Yeah, absolutely a murderer. So I'm not an apologist for Putin, but if he wanted to, he could have control of our skies quite easily.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow Bo's series Epochs, this time about Caesar returning to Britain. And if you want to see all the other things we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.